Welcome to the Target Stream with me, Robert Inlakesh, for MINTPRESS News. Today we have a big show as the US is currently, as we are recording, striking Iran. We have Donald Trump vowing to launch a massive attack on Iran. And in return, of course, in retaliation, the Iranians have threatened unprecedented strikes themselves. Israel has raised its state of alert. We also have Yemen, which has officially fired on a number of vessels linked to Saudi Arabia, enforcing its blockade on Saudi Arabia in response to the blockade that has been imposed upon Yemen since 2015 by the Saudi-led coalition that they have been at war with. And there's a lot more that we are going to get into in this episode. But of course, first, we are looking for 300 new members to keep this news show alive. We have been targeted, of course, and you can find us on Patreon, and you can also join us on MINTPRESS News, our YouTube account, if you are watching here. So, getting right down to it, we have a lot that is currently ongoing. As I mentioned, there are strikes ongoing as I speak right now. Trump has vowed to launch a massive attack, what he calls a massive attack on Iran. And this was exclusive to Axios. He didn't give any deadline to them for this decision, but I'm willing to say that the oil prices, which is noted here in the piece, has something to do with it. But more so, I would say the reason for this escalation is because Iran has been systematically destroying the US's radar systems and air defense systems across the region. Now, many people have asked why Israel hasn't yet been struck by Iran, especially since these strikes that Iran have been carrying out have been so massive, so overwhelming against US targets. And there's an enormous amount of evidence emerging day after day of what Iran is hitting and how much they are destroying of the some 20 different sites which have been battered since the start of this conflict, which are US facilities across the region since February 28th. And so the United States it's sort of stuck in this situation right now where it has one of two options. Either everything is about to escalate dramatically and they are going to continue to lose lots of assets in the region without really committing themselves to all-out war. You may have noted that the Americans have not been striking Tehran. They haven't been striking Isfahan, Qom, Mashhad, the big population centers inside of Iran. Primarily, they have focused on civilian infrastructure and military installations in the south of Iran. And quite frankly, if the war does evolve, it's very clear that a number of fronts are going to open. We've already seen that with Yemen. Ansarallah's blockade on Saudi Arabia is cutting off roughly about 7% of the world's oil. This is a big deal, of course. Those oil prices, Brent crude futures have gone up above $100 at this point. And Trump is not happy about that. The consumer at the gas pump is not going to be happy about that. And again, the United States can either go into a full-scale escalation, or it can back down and try and seal a deal. But according to Axios as well, they also reported that Iran has rejected a ceasefire proposal put forward by the United States, because of course the United States is now trying to get itself out of the predicament that it put itself in by violating the memorandum of understanding and deciding that it would pursue the course of violence against Iran in order to put more pressure on them. So that's not been going too well. We'll take a look. This is a map of the targets that Iran has struck today. This is not looking good for the United States. The air defense systems, especially in Kuwait, there's basically nothing left in Kuwait, nothing left in Bahrain. They've been striking Bahrain as well very heavily. They started striking again. That's not noted on this map here, but they started striking again after obviously this graphic was put forth. But they have been attacking very heavily there too. And there is an enormous amount of evidence of what they've been taking out. When it comes to Jordan, they're also degrading the air defense systems. And what the IRGC in an official statement said they targeted and destroyed, according to them, are a THAAD missile, anti-missile system, a Patriot missile system, and the CRAM air defense system as well. All struck batteries and other parts of the system targeted in these Iranian strikes, as well as hangars where MQ-9 drones are stored, and of course, helicopters and other assets. Another thing that Iran has targeted, and the evidence has just been released to back this claim up, is a data center in Bahrain, an Amazon data center. And of course, Amazon has contracts and has close business ties with the US military. It is, as a multinational corporation, heavily implicated in the US military industrial complex. It has a partnership with the Pentagon on cloud technology. And as you can see, there was a strike. It looks as if a precision missile hit that site. Also, what we've seen is that in Kuwait, an early warning system was taken out. And again, here is the evidence that has been presented for this strike. The Iranians claimed they had taken out this target. Now we know that there is evidence that it has been taken out. The reason why they're taking out early warning systems and the air defense systems, especially that THAAD system in Jordan that they claim to have destroyed, is very simple. They are making it very, very difficult, not only for the US to defend its own bases, but the Israelis, because the Israelis are the only ones where they've left them. The US has left them still with air defenses. Quite frankly, they protect the Israelis over their own troops. They don't care about their own troops. And Donald Trump earlier this week tried to blame Jordan for the few missiles that slipped through and killed. Now we have the identities confirmed of 3 soldiers in Jordan that were struck. And he tried to blame Jordan. And he was talking about, we have the best equipment in the world and all the rest. Well, what equipment do you think that is being operated in Jordan? And who do you think are even the operators? Well, of course, we know the answer to that. It wasn't Jordanian air defense systems that they built domestically that were guarding those US bases. And also taking out those radars, taking out the THAAD systems, and the THAAD systems are the most effective at taking down ballistic missiles, is there to open the way, open the skies, so that the Israelis, even if they have the ability to continue to detect the incoming Iranian ballistic missiles, they are in a shorter supply than they were at the start of this war, but they are going to have a harder time shooting them down because they're going to have less warning that they are coming. So that is going to significantly impact Israel's ability to intercept Iranian ballistic missiles and across the region as well. It's gotten so bad in Kuwait that Iranian surveillance drones are able to fly over Kuwaiti airspace and monitor different targets and look for targets. What also appears to be the case, I mean, if you look at what's been happening, this is the Muwafaq Sulti air base in Jordan. And these are the red dots there are all locations that were hit. And since this was produced, there's been more sites here that have been targeted. But the precision with which Iran is hitting these targets and the fact that Iran is able to often confirm that the moving targets, we're talking about now it is carrying out these sort of surprise attacks against HIMARS, the HIMARS systems, and taking out ATACMS missiles in Kuwait and Bahrain. and striking hangars and newly built, newly constructed hangars inside of Jordan tells you that their intelligence has increased significantly. There's a number of different explanations that have been presented in the media. And of course, there's been speculation about the obvious culprits for this. A lot of people are saying that China provided intelligence. The Iranians, the IRGC themselves, released a statement thanking, this was a few days ago, thanking the people of Jordan and the Jordanian military for their help in targeting US forces inside their country. Now, Jordan's official position is there are no US bases inside their country, which of course is just a ridiculous lie. And the Jordanian regime doesn't really have any sovereignty, and that's why, it has to come out with these rather ridiculous statements. Well, there's a partnership and we're friends and we're letting our friends share our bases. I'm like, yeah, sure, bro. Anyway, with that being said, the Iranians have definitely gotten more precise intelligence, and they are hitting their targets at a rate and with such power and precision that it's hard to believe that alone they have made this leap in their intelligence. Now, some people say they put this down to the fact that the US air defense systems were degraded badly across the region, that the radars of some of them were already taken out. And this is the reason why they're getting hit so hard. But it is clear that the targets that the Iranians are hitting, they have live intelligence. It's not old intelligence where they're hitting targets and they think there might be something there. There's evidence that they know what they are hitting when they're hitting it, and they're able to assess afterwards whether they struck their target successfully. And this is very important to note. Now, the other potential partner here could be, of course, Russia. And the argument goes for Russia helping the Iranians that the Russians are taking huge hits to their energy infrastructure currently. And they may be doing this, they may be providing help to the Iranians in intelligence in order to get back at the United States. That's the other argument. The Chinese, of course, also have their interests in degrading the US and allowing for something like this to happen. You can make an argument there. The fact of the matter is we don't exactly know. But when we have images coming out like this, it's from a few days ago now, this is a soldier housing that was struck in Jordan. We also have more recent footage that emerged. This is, just pull this up here. This is the King Faisal Air Base. Again, hangars targeted. And you can see from this satellite imagery that there are scorch marks there, which are showing damage. But also here we have from the Ali Salim Air Base in Kuwait. This is a number like right here, what you're seeing, this is housing, US soldier housing here. There's US soldiers allegedly stationed there. Now, if this attack happened and US soldiers were there, there is no way they survived this. That's the first point. But of course, we don't know, we can't confirm nor deny whether there were actually troops there. But again, this is damning evidence that Iran is managing to strike targets with precision, and we're actually seeing the evidence of this. During that 40-day war period, the initial period of the war, we stopped seeing all of the evidence come out. It wasn't as obvious what was being hit. Now we're seeing that the Iranians are able to strike at will. And one of the things that is very interesting, and this is why ultimately the United States is in a difficult position where it either has to go back to a ceasefire, desperately try and get another ceasefire period to come in, or it needs to escalate dramatically. It only has one of two options here that it can take, is because this sort of low intensity fighting where Iran's missile bases, they're able to use them very freely like they are right now. They're not under constant attack. They can take breaks and they can take their time with what they're targeting. This favors Iran heavily. Now, of course, the United States is taking this out on the Iranian civilian population. For instance, the Shalamche border crossing, some footage of it, was struck last night between Iran and Iraq. And it is a border crossing that was packed with pilgrims. It's a popular site for pilgrims to cross, and it was targeted by a U.S. airstrike. They're also, of course, targeting civilian infrastructure. They're going after factories. They're going after bridges. They've attacked electrical infrastructure. The U.S. have attacked a water desalination facility. They are, of course, doing damage to the Iranians in the south of Iran. But also there's a lot of evidence to suggest that they're hitting these same military targets and bases that they've hit countless times, and the exact same locations in those bases, and seem not to have too much intelligence on where Iran's military assets are. And a lot of them, of course, including its naval assets, are underground. They're buried in mountains. And so you can't reach it. And so especially not with these sort of standoff munitions, and they're firing, ATACMS and these cruise missiles. They're not going to penetrate, Iranian military infrastructure with these kinds of munitions in the way that they would like to. I mean, I believe that they targeted, during the past 2 weeks, they've targeted an Iranian tower, military tower, surveillance tower, which is based along the Strait of Hormuz, near the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf. They targeted the same tower like 7 times before it fell down. It's just, it's ridiculous. Honestly, they're just bombing this site again and again and again, and they're not achieving anything. And if you see all the stuff that's released by CENTCOM, or as I like to call it, COPCOM, everything that they release, it's just a bunch of nothing burgers. They're releasing footage where they're evidently targeting sites that they've hit before. And they're also hitting, open silos where there's no missiles left in them. There's no secondary explosion. There's nothing there. So the most damage is being done to civilian infrastructure. Of course, like, Iran is not going to suffer no casualties or anything like that amongst its military. It is suffering. The United States is always going to have that power to take out assets and to target its troops. For instance, it targeted barracks and killed scores of Iranian soldiers while they were sleeping at night. And so it has the capability to do this. But ultimately, Iran is in a good position because, and a lot of people, again, with the Israel element of this, if Iran starts attacking the Israelis right now, then that means the Israelis are going to be adding more pressure. The United States appears, according to what we're seeing right now, operationally exhausted. And it's now it's redeploying its strategic bombers to the region. It's threatening this massive air campaign. It's talking about going after civilian infrastructure. There's these big threats. Just going to play some of the footage because I think we're on the 27th wave now of Iranian missiles and drones that are being fired. This is some of the footage that has been released of ballistic missile fire recently. But they're basically firing on the south of Iran, and Iran is taking its time and taking out whatever it wants to in the region. It seems to have better intelligence this time, and it's destroying those air defense and radar systems. It's taking out anything it likes at will, and there's not all that much that truly hurts Iran that is happening in return. So again, it's just flooding these military assets. It's also moving a lot of military assets from bases that it was previously operating in. So there are bases inside Jordan where there is some evidence to suggest that they've completely evacuated those bases. And in Bahrain and Kuwait, some bases have most certainly already been totally evacuated. They're unusable. So they're moving their military assets and their operations further towards the West and preparing for an escalation. And so if they're going to carry out this with their strategic bombers, they're going to bring in the B-2s, the B-1s, the B-52s, and they're going to start targeting Iranian nuclear sites, which is very likely that they'll do this, that they'll target nuclear sites, they'll target their power plants. But here's a major issue that they're going to have. And I mean, you can simply just look at it on a map and it just speaks for itself, right? Iran, and I've said this before, Iran has like around 500 power stations, power plants that you have to target and take out. Bahrain, I mean, you take out 3 and it's over. Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE, I mean, these are tiny little states. Like, I mean, just on a map, I don't think people think about this. This is Bahrain here. This is how tiny it is in comparison to Iran. And I know this is very basic, but just seeing it on a map and looking at this, it really does tell the story for itself. You need say no more. So the Americans are going to have to go after all of this civilian infrastructure. They want to target bridges as well. And as we've seen evidence of, the Iranians are able to reconstruct bridges that are struck. They are able to find ways to get around this. They can repair rail infrastructure when it is targeted, as it was, I think, the start of this recent round a few weeks ago. The Iranians are able to get around this. Their infrastructure is built with war in mind, much of it. They did go through the Iran-Iraq war, so their population knows how to live under wartime conditions. They've been under sanctions since the Islamic Republic came into existence in 1979. Bahrain and Kuwait and Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, these are just, luxury resorts in the Persian Gulf. The people there, and especially, given the conditions, that how hot it is, if you don't have electricity, how difficult that is, a small number of water desalination facilities, if they're taken out, it's going to be very, very difficult. You cannot, those countries don't exist anymore. And then the United States is also flirting with the idea of bombing Iranian nuclear power plants that are in close proximity to the Persian Gulf. And if you have intrusion of that nuclear material into the waters of the Persian Gulf, then of course, yes, the coastline of Iran is going to be impacted. All of these communities living along the coastline are going to be impacted. There's going to be mass displacement. They can't live there anymore. But also, goodbye Kuwait. That whole coastline for Saudi Arabia, gone, uninhabitable. Bahrain, uninhabitable. Qatar, uninhabitable. United Arab Emirates, uninhabitable. That's what the US is flirting with in wanting to run this crazy campaign. People may say, well, they have precision missiles. They'll hit infrastructure in a specific way. Well, as we know, they don't always have the best intelligence. They make mistakes. They operate, and this is something I suspected and I said back at the time about the Minab school bombing and all of these attacks on civilian infrastructure, that they'll literally just take targets from their AI system and not even check it. And they won't have proper checkups. And specifically with a lot of these attacks that happened on civilian infrastructure, where we saw that they killed large numbers of civilians, we've heard since that they were using AI systems like the Israelis did. So the Israelis acquire these targets from AI systems that pick the targets out for them. And then, in the case of the Israelis, it's, a human looks at it for less than 60 seconds and then decides to take down an entire building block. The Israelis, of course, are way more brutal in terms of what they've been doing, but the United States is the same thing. So if you're targeting energy infrastructure, what if you miss? What if you're slightly off? What if your system is slightly wrong? And then you have this environmental catastrophe that you cause. And of course, as a result of it, an economic catastrophe that you cause. But again, Iran is clearing the way now. It is taking out those early warning systems, those radars, those air defense systems. It's smashing sites along inside of Iraq, especially in Iraqi Kurdistan, this region here. They're going after all those air defense systems, and that is going to make it easier for them to hit the Israelis because, again, at the moment, the Americans operating alone, although they have more firepower and they're more powerful than the Israelis playing a role will actually help them a lot because it provides almost like cover fire. The Israelis can go after a lot of Iranian bases. They can try and take out missile launchers, stuff like this, and put pressure on Iran so it's not as easy to fire as it is currently, for example, while the US go in with its strategic bombers and it tries to take out more infrastructure. The Israelis would play a role. And of course, Iran knows this, and Iran has its own plan for dealing with the Israelis, because alone the Israelis are really nothing. They've proven themselves incapable of fighting Iran alone. But of course, Iran has Hezbollah as its ground force against the Israelis. So the Israelis now have raised their state of alert. They are speaking openly in their media about joining a campaign against Iran. And right now, that's why we've seen that US President Donald Trump has brought over Joseph Aoun, the US proxy that is operating out of Beirut, the so-called president of Lebanon, who he was sitting next to and talking about how he's going to bring in Ahmed al-Shara, the Syrian president, or Abu Muhammad al-Julani, his guys, to come and invade Lebanese territory. And of course, Joseph Aoun sits there like a good boy and, licks his master's boots and talks about how wonderful Donald Trump is as a president because, Humpty Dumpty, he has no sovereignty and he has no brain of his own. And so he agreed to an agreement to allow for Israeli forces to occupy the south of Lebanon. So that's what all of that is about, because the Israelis, Hezbollah can basically take care of the Israelis. They can put the Israelis under pressure, especially in the north. They can attack their air bases. They can attack their early warning systems, their radars. This is what we saw Hezbollah going for when it entered the war on March 2nd earlier this year. Hezbollah was going heavily, even targeting with precision missiles, Israeli radars that were located near Tel Aviv. And it was hitting them with precision as well at the time, I may note. And so bogging the Israeli military down in South Lebanon is something that Hezbollah can effectively do to deal with the Israelis, to distract them. It makes it more difficult if the Israeli Air Force has to attack Iran while also having to deal with Lebanon. So, of course, what the United States does in order to try and get around this is it is doing a roll of the dice. We're going to use the Syrians to attack into the Bekaa, perhaps. We want to try and create a situation that might stir up a civil war inside of Lebanon, anything to basically take that pressure off the Israelis. And this, as I've covered in previous shows, will likely result in the Iraqis coming in and taking positions near Deir ez-Zor, and they'll probably come to Abu Kamal and cross through the border there, set up positions, and then set supply lines. I mean, at the very worst for the United States and the Israelis, if the Syrians do invade into Lebanese territory, Hezbollah at that point, because it might be a very difficult situation that they're faced with, they might decide to go and cut off the coast of Syria. They could do that. And by the way, the Syrian armed forces at the moment, they don't have any strategic weapons. The best thing they have at their disposal are the FPV drones that we've seen Hezbollah, for instance, use against the Israelis, but that's not going to save them. And they might find allies inside of Syria. I mean, I'm saying all of this is a lot of hypotheticals, but this is something that is still realistic that could happen if the Syrians do actually follow what Donald Trump is pressuring them to do. And of course, there's been these mobilizations along the Lebanese border for this to happen. That's why I'm talking about it. If this indeed does happen, this can backfire massively. We can see that the situation in Syria will change dramatically. Of course, it's going to be a bloodbath in Lebanon. We've gone through that and why that is in past episodes here. But the Israelis are trying to deal, and the Americans have been trying to deal with Lebanon. And it appears that the game changer here has actually been Ansar Allah. They have managed to really shake things up, because Ansar Allah, which the mainstream corporate media calls the Houthis, and the Guardian, of course, calls them the Houthis, which is not their name, but the Yemeni armed forces have struck 2 Saudi tankers, and they are imposing their will on the Saudis by imposing a blockade on them. And this has greatly impacted the price of oil. And also in total, it's about a dozen ships that have been turned around. So they are very effectively implementing this blockade. And this is actually pushing the United States to accelerate quicker, because they're in a difficult predicament here. Yemen is escalating, and Yemen can go further. This is just the beginning for Yemen. So we haven't even seen them go all out yet. What they could do, of course, is they could fully close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and that would deal a severe blow to the global economy. So here's Bab el-Mandeb here. And just so everyone knows, because Saudi Arabia has apparently got the green light from the Trump administration to go ahead and to attack Yemen and combat the blockade. The U.S. launched Operation Rough Riders, like the most ridiculous, stupid name. I mean, does Pete Hegseth think he's DMX or something? Because it's just cringe. But that was the name of their operation. Wasted billions of dollars. They brought in their strategic bombers. They used the B-2s. They struck the military bases buried in mountains in Yemen. And you know what happened after about a month and a half of the US's bombing campaign on Yemen? Well, they struck a bunch of civilian infrastructure and killed civilians. And that's about it. They didn't do a whole lot. So Yemen can definitely combat Saudi Arabia. And of course, they can deal huge blows to Saudi Arabia. And we've heard from the leader of Ansar Allah, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, that if Sana'a is the capital of Yemen is struck, then Riyadh will be struck. And they can most certainly do it, because we've seen Yemen strike Tel Aviv. So if they can strike Tel Aviv, Riyadh is a stone's throw away in comparison. So they can definitely do that. And apparently, the United Arab Emirates are mending ties with their Saudi neighbors once again after a brief fallout, so that they can work together in Yemen, which means the Southern Giants Brigades, which are the formerly, I guess they're still claiming they're really in existence, but they're just a proxy force, the Southern Transitional Council in Yemen, the STC, which is a UAE proxy. Their Salafists are back in the fight. Some of the toughest fighters in the Yemeni opposition, which is backed by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, fighting Ansar Allah in Yemen. Some of the toughest fighters are from the STC, and they are, of course, aligned with Al-Qaeda and Daesh, right? Because the good guys are always Al-Qaeda, according to UAE, Saudi Arabia, the United States, right? Somehow, this whole entire region has been blown to pieces, and somewhere in the region of 6 million people have been murdered during this so-called war on terror, right? All of this death and destruction, all of this civilian displacement, the refugee crisis, all of it has been done because of Al-Qaeda, we're told. Al-Qaeda and its attack on September 11. And because of that, we had to go and we had to take out Afghanistan. We had to go after Iraq. And then for some reason, we're trying to do regime change in Libya and in Syria. Right. And now we're in Iran, okay, because of the Islamic terrorism. But hey, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Yemen. It was in Syria. It continues to be. It's on our side when it's come to fighting Iran. Oh, and that's right as well. It's on Israel's side in Gaza too, because who is Israel backing in the Gaza Strip? Well, Israel created 5 different groups, which are packed filled with these thugs and criminals, of course, but they have these fighters who are formerly members of Al-Qaeda linked groups and Daesh that are fighting on their side, right? 5 different groups in the area, the 60+% of Gaza, which they've taken off and illegally occupied in the Gaza Strip, right? Anyway, that aside, because of course, this is all important information, another big development has happened. So the Saudis, there's been a deal between Saudi Arabia and the US, and that is a deal for a civilian nuclear program to be built. The Israelis to have a civilian nuclear program. Now, Trump has come out and said it. He spilled the beans. He said, yeah, we're only going to do it if they recognize Israel, right? And by the way, as soon as this story emerged, I knew that it was about recognizing Israel, because this was one of the preconditions that back in 2023, before October 7, the Biden administration was trying to get Saudi on board and to do a normalization deal with the Israelis. And so the Biden administration was offering what? It wanted to do this defense pact with Saudi Arabia. And it also wanted to, and the Saudis wanted a civilian nuclear program. So that just happened. We'll take a look at what the White House press secretary had to say when she was questioned on this. And then I'll add more of my thoughts on this story, because it is important to all of this.
Another question, sure. Just playing devil's advocate, why does Saudi Arabia get a civilian nuclear deal, but Iran doesn't get a civilian nuclear deal?
Well, again, this agreement is still being worked out. It will eventually, hopefully, be finalized with the condition that the president spoke about this morning. But this agreement in particular, as it's been discussed thus far, does give priority access for American companies in the Saudi nuclear energy program, which will ultimately benefit American industry workers and supply chains. So the deal that has been discussed thus far and will continue to be discussed absolutely puts America first, and that's obviously very important to this president. Ed.
America first. It puts America first. That's the reason why. Well, the real reason why, of course, is because it's to do with normalizing with the Israelis. But the reason why they're doing this is to incite more strife between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Because if Saudi Arabia gets a civilian nuclear program like Iran has one right now, now Saudi Arabia does not need it. It does not need it. I know they have this whole diversification thing going on, whatever. They don't need it as a source of energy. The reason why is because it's to counter Iran. Then what happens if there's some backdoors deals done, or there's just allegations that Saudi Arabia is on the way to a nuclear weapon and has enriched past a certain percentage? Then you will definitely have a nuclear arms race. So you're adding another layer. Like if you were to try and construct a way to force Iran into getting a nuclear weapon, this is the way that you would do it. This is the way that you would do it. You would do a deal, right, with them initially, and which, you know, was sold to their population to open up ties with the West. You would allow their reformists, which in the West are called moderates in Iran, you would allow them to get their way. That's the first thing you would do. And then you would go back on your deal with those reformists. You would undermine those reformists who, again, they called the moderates opposed to the hardliners, which is, of course, biased language here, but I'm just going to use it for the sake of this explanation. You would do that. You would undermine the reformists all the way, 100%. You would make them seem illegitimate and stupid for ever having done a deal with you. Then what you would do is you would enter into negotiations again, a number of times perhaps, right? just for good measure. And you would use those negotiations, which Iran has participated in and is participating in good faith at the time, and offering you concessions at. And while you're at the negotiating table, you would then go and just use it to set up attacks, to bomb their nuclear facilities, to bomb civilian infrastructure, to attack the country. And then you would add more sanctions because they ended up responding to your threats. That would be, you pretty much do it, right? You would have a situation where the head of the IAEA is going to be completely biased and on your side, and also sort of give the impression that the IAEA has cooperated with the Israelis to help bomb your civilian nuclear facilities. Then you would go again and do a massive attempt at a regime change war using riots, and then you would come in with your airstrikes and all of that. And then if that doesn't work, if all that doesn't work to force Iran to get a nuclear weapon, they have no inspectors there, they don't trust diplomacy. Every time you negotiate with them over the issue, you bomb them, you trick them into bombing them, you undermine the people that you call moderates that want to open up economic relations with the West. And then you go to the neighboring country, which is perhaps the biggest competitor historically in the region with Iran, and you grant them a nuclear program. Everything you could possibly think of to push Iran towards a nuclear weapon is being done. And why? Because the United States, at the end of the day, does not give a damn about Iran having, it's on its way to a nuclear. It knew that Iran was not on its way to a nuclear weapon. I mean, this conflict may actually be ended by Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon at the end of the day. That may be what ends this whole scenario, this war. I don't know. I can't tell the future. But if you wanted to do everything to drive them towards that, that's what you're doing right now. You're driving them towards a nuclear weapon. There was a fatwa issued that said that we cannot, on behalf of the Iranians, and Khamenei is the one that made it, who they killed. They killed the guy that made a religious ruling that you cannot acquire a nuclear weapon because it's immoral. They killed that guy. Right? That's another thing to add on to the ways to force a country to get a nuclear weapon. And then you see all the examples of countries that do have nuclear weapons and they're doing well. And then if you look at Libya, which Netanyahu was saying the Libya example is what the United States needs to do with Iran. Well, what happened with Libya? Well, yeah, Libya is a failed state now and was destroyed. So denuclearization, not a very good idea, then perhaps you shouldn't go in that direction. Everything possible to stop Iran, to force Iran to get a nuclear weapon is being done. Everything possible to force them into a military confrontation is being done. Like all of this is because they're being forced. Their hand is being forced at the end of the day. And we're going to take a look at this clip because this was Marco Rubio recently, and he makes quite an interesting admission here. So we're going to take a look at this clip.
These are the people. Understand, Iran is a rich country. Iran could be the richest country in the Middle East if they want it to be, but instead they take their money and they use it and they give it to Hezbollah, they give it to Hamas, they give it to the Houthis, they give it to Shia militias, they give it to sponsor terrorism all over the world, they give it to try to kill people all over the world, they build drones and missiles and pursue a nuclear weapons program. That's what they spent their money on. If they had spent their money on their people and on their economy, today Iran could be probably the richest country in the region if you want to know the truth. So.
The reason why that's very revealing, and I wanted to play that clip, is because he's admitting that Iran could be a rich country. You know what's the thing holding them back? It's not that they spend a fraction of what the United States spends on its military, right? Iran spends nothing comparative to all of its neighbors, even on its military, on its ballistic missile program, its drones, because the ballistic missiles and the drones are new. They weren't producing these drones and their ballistic missiles and everything when the Islamic Revolution started in 1979. That's not what they did. And yet still, the US pushed Saddam Hussein to invade Iran and attack Iran. And the West gave him chemical weapons to attack Iranian civilians, which would then later be used on the Kurdish population in Iraq as well. Right? So this whole narrative is nonsense. But they keep talking about those key points, and the key points are their drones, their missile program, and backing their allies. That's the reason. That's what they say. But the real reason is they're independent. They've acquired the means to defend themselves, and they're backing resistance movements in the region, which is counter to U.S. aims. So you've got to come in there and you've got to kill them, and you've got to deprive them of the ability to flourish economically. And that's the reality here. That's why Iran cannot flourish economically. Despite that, by the way, because there's these people that come along and say, oh, why doesn't Iran just give up and just go back to, I don't know, the Shah's failed offspring, right? The guy that lives in the United States, this loser. Going back to, why don't they just accept that and go to this? Number one, I mean, this guy is an embarrassment. But beyond that, under the Shah, who was imposed on the Iranian people by the United States and the British, the poverty rate was like at least 25%, right? I'm just giving the rough figures that are given. You know what it was in, I think, 2004 when they recorded it? This is before the hardline sanctions came on. It was around 6%. And still, the poverty rate is lower than it was under the Shah. Why? Because under the Shah, and they give this impression, oh, women were out on the beach in bikinis, and and they'll show you some footage of like how Iran, in Tehran, all these women would have nose jobs and they dye their hair blonde and they want to be like the West. Because apparently, for some reason, dyeing your hair blonde and having a nose job and going and getting plastic surgery is freedom and is a measure of how well you're doing as a country. I mean, it's just ridiculous and stupid. But this is the measure in the liberal Western democracy freedom mind of what makes a country good. But they show you these little clips from the elite in Iranian society, the ones who are doing well, at the expense of the rest of the country, and then just ignore the vast majority of the country and their economic conditions and the inequality, and ignore the fact that, for instance, now, opposed to under the Shah, there's more representation of women in government in Iran than there was under the Shah. Oh, whoops. But all of these things that they're saying about Iran, the education levels are better for men and for women, right? Because they're always trying to use women's rights as an excuse to go in and bomb and kill women. So it's like, oh, those women don't have rights. Well, if they don't have rights anyway, they look a lot better without heads, don't you think? That's basically the argument you're giving. Well, their women don't have rights. Let's blow them up. A great idea. Let's deprive them of water, a source of water. Let's come in with our NGOs and push our cultural values on them, and then create hierarchies in their villages and get them to fight each other and sit back and watch, and ensure that they never have sovereignty, and control them economically, control what food they're getting and how they get it, get them hooked on drugs, whatever it is. Let's do that because their women don't have freedom. That's going to bring more freedom to women, is bombing them and destroying their country for sure, right? That being said, right, we have these Iranians who are currently crashing out, which we'll take a look at, because I'm sure many have seen the video that was released by the mayor of New York City, Zohran Mamdani, about arresting Netanyahu and his opposition to Netanyahu. So, of course, the State Department's best friends in the Iranian diaspora community are, again, active and talking about how horrible Mamdani is and how he's, covering for the evil Islamic regime and all of the rest of it. So let's take a look at Masih Alinejad and what she has to say, because I want to use this as a point to debunk a load of crap that we're hearing come out about Iran from there. But we'll listen to what these people are saying, because Donald Trump now is claiming that 52,000 Iranian protesters were killed. 52,000. Started off around 20, and then he was thinking, nah, 30. And then he went to 35, but that wasn't enough. 52 now. 52. Sounds better, doesn't it?
I'm going to the Free Press to talk about the new wave of executions in Iran, which became like a new norm, and no leaders across the globe talking about it, especially those who care about human rights, who cares about democracy, dignity, humanity, and especially you, Mamdani. Look, I had to go by bicycle. None of this brake works. None of these brake works. And I was about to die. And I just opened my Twitter, my social media. It's all about you, Mamdani, talking about that you're ready to arrest Netanyahu. Go ahead and arrest the Islamic Republic leaders who come to New York freely. Yeah, they come here as well, but they're hanging my people. Suddenly, you just see one side because you literally don't care about people. You care about your political agenda. Otherwise, you're the mayor of New York. You have to care about the safety of New Yorkers. Fix the bicycle. Yeah, fix the city bicycle.
Okay, she's crashing out about this bicycle, by the way. It's not owned by the city of New York. I looked this up because I'm just like, oh, okay, like city bicycle or whatever it is. I looked it up. And it's owned by Lyft. It's a privately owned company. And she's talking about like Mamdani, evil Mamdani, who's he needs to arrest Islamic Republic, blah, 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 is complaining and crashing out about a bicycle owned by a private company and not by the city, and asking Mamdani to fix it. So now the mayor of New York City has to fix your privately owned bicycle. But this is the mindset of these people, right? And this is like, you know, what the State Department has to throw at us in terms of the propaganda, you know? All of this because Mamdani said, yeah, Netanyahu should be arrested. He called on the federal government. Basically, you know, if you haven't watched the video, most people have, it doesn't look like he's going to get arrested, right? He's going to be able to come to New York because legally, the mayor of New York cannot arrest Netanyahu when he comes. He has diplomatic immunity. And to implement the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant on the basis of war crimes, of course, that Netanyahu has committed war crimes, that would take the federal government to do that. That's the crux of what he's saying. But then he's saying like he opposes Netanyahu being in New York. But she's got a problem with that. And of course, she's got to use this as an excuse to talk about you should arrest the evil Islamic regime officials that come. Like, there is no arrest warrant for Abbas Araghchi or a representative of the Islamic Republic who goes to the United Nations. In fact, Danny Denon, who's a representative of the Israelis, who's there, his ambassador, was able to go to the United Nations building and from there talk about arresting and how Mamdani needs to be arrested. But these people don't make any sense, right? Like that is the crux of everything. And then she's talking about, again, like I don't even think it's worth playing more of it. She's just crashing out over the bikes, which again has nothing to do with Mamdani. And then, why don't you arrest blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, you can make an argument to arrest, I don't know, officials from every country on earth. They don't all have ICC war crimes warrants for their arrests, do they? No. But of course, these people like this, who are the ones who pushed all of the nonsense garbage about, oh, there was a genocide against Iranian protesters earlier this year, and now they're hanging. Now you hear all the stories because the war has escalated again. The Iranian authorities are executing all of these civilians. That's what they're saying. So, like, for instance, they have this big story. I believe there's like a 19-year-old, something like that, who is being executed. And again, if you look at the reason that is given for why this person's being executed, and again, I don't know anything about the case, like intricate details of the case, but the way they present it is like, this is a civilian that's picked up off the street for holding a placard and is now being executed by the evil Islamic regime. Now, Iran has the death penalty, right? And I'm not here, I can't judge, I can't be the judge of whether their court system is good or bad. Quite frankly, I don't know. But the individual that they were talking about was charged with killing multiple police officers and then like desecrating their bodies. These are the sort of charges the people are being executed are charged with, is killing people. Now, there are states in the US where you can get the death penalty. And I'm sure murdering police officers could probably get you there, right? Now, again, I don't know whether it's true or not in terms of, the charges. I have no idea. I cannot substantiate that. But these people, it's like, these people are being hung for no reason. They're being killed for no reason. And it's like, you can't tell the truth just a little bit. But of course, Donald Trump, with his nonsense propaganda, comes out and says all of this stuff about, oh, Iran's now killed 52,000 people. That's the numbers that he's coming up with. 52,000 people, which is why I wanted actually to go into this subject to begin with. Because those figures that were coming out, right? This whole, the protests or riots that happened earlier this year, they started off as peaceful protests, and then they turned into fully blown riots where people were armed. There's evidence of this. I don't believe if you're a serious person, you can dispute that there were armed elements that were actively going and killing police officers, burning police officers alive, burning down businesses, burning mosques, attacking public transport, setting buses on fire, attacking the metro, everything you could think of, right? They're going crazy, all right? But what happened is there were organic protests that occurred over economic mismanagement. And the government said as such and admitted to mismanagement. But really what had happened is, and Scott Bessent had admitted to this, the US Treasury Secretary admitted that they had basically messed with the Iranian currency exchange to manufacture a crisis. So there were protests. And internally, Iranian officials even admitted to mismanagement on their side, which allowed this to happen easier. But of course, the US was still involved in manufacturing the situation. So it did play a role in that. There were organic protests, which started late last year. Suddenly, when they start gaining traction, there's Iranian unions behind them. There's all these people that start popping up in these protests out of nowhere and start screaming for the fall of the regime. Most of them got beaten up and thrown by the protesters themselves out of the protests, right? All of the Iranian unions were backing these demonstrations. Their demands were fully legitimate. There was no violence. This happened for a while. And if you track the protests in Iran, because I believe the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, the think tank, they have like a tracker you can go and see of all the Iranian protests, even the smallest little ones, they track it. So, this actually works to our advantage that they've got this on their website, but you can go and see all the protests that are always happening. There's protests that frequently happen throughout Iran for a multitude of different reasons, and people got angry. Normally the economy has something to do with that. Government mismanagement has to do with that. So they started protesting. Suddenly, Naftali Bennett is making a video, which he posts on X and other social media platforms, talking about Israel backs your revolution to overthrow the Iranian government. Well, that's a little bit weird. And then you've just got all of this nonsense coming out that's being pushed. And they're talking about violent revolt and all of this and a revolt against the government. It's all AI images. It's all fake. That like some of this AI footage that was released at the time, there's like police officers with two heads and all sorts of stuff, right? So it's obviously AI manufactured. And suddenly then at the start of the year, it just starts popping off. And there's all these gunfights in the street and everything. And from there it went, and it escalated over a 2-day period. Now, all of these groups started coming out and telling you that 50 billion Iranians died in 13 seconds, and it was the worst atrocity ever seen in human history, right? And if you deny it, if you deny the 500 trillion people that died, then, you're such an evil supporter of the Islamic regime. So the highest figure that came out of that time, by the way, it came out from a Toronto-based non-governmental organization. This one right here, it's called the International Center for Human Rights, right? They claimed that 43,000 Iranian protesters were killed and another 350,000 were injured. That's what they claim. What do they offer for this? A 900-word-long blog post. A 900-word-long blog post with no evidence. They didn't offer any footage for that, no forensic data, no independently verified proof at all. Nothing, right? And the reason I'm pulling this up here is because if you look on their website, you just go down a little bit. Oh, what do we see? The growing friendship between Iran and Israel. And the heads of this Iranian human rights group posted on social media celebrating the death of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, who was assassinated by Israel. And they're drinking wine with an Israeli flag and the Iranian Shah flag, right? The old Iranian Shah era flag, which is back here. This is supposed to be like the objective human rights group that produced the numbers, right? 350,000 injured. And they're celebrating Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the former Secretary General of Hezbollah, being killed. Now, why is that so bad, right? Why is that so incredibly bad? Well, of course, it's an assassination, so this is immature at best. But there were also 300 civilians in Lebanon that were killed in this strike. And that's the organization. These are the people, the Iranians in Toronto that are heading up this operation. They have their website, and everything just looks like blog posts on it. There's no evidence provided for any of these figures that were released. But suddenly, all over the internet now, because there's a human rights group that has claimed this figure, 45,000 are dead. Oh my God. Well, if you go to the actual blog post that was released, there's nothing. And 350,000 injured. Like just for like in 2 nights that this allegedly happened. Okay. There would be evidence of such massacres from space. Like, we're talking about historic levels of brutality. Everyone has an iPhone or whatever, a smartphone in this day and age. In Iran as well, believe it or not, they have iPhones and they have cameras, right? There's no videos of this. Like, you don't have video. Like, there would be so much footage of this brutality and the bodies lined up in the streets and everything happening, and indiscriminate fight. You would at least have some footage to show for that. Some footage, not grainy footage of like, oh, we don't know, there's some shooting here and there's a body on the floor. Or they'll present photos or videos of bodies in body bags. Well, that doesn't tell you anything. That could be a police officer, that could be a member of the besieged, that could be anyone. It doesn't necessarily mean that we don't know who killed them from that. We have no idea, right? So presenting that and saying from either side, whether it's the Iranian government claiming something or the opposition claiming something, like a photo of a body bag, of people in body bags, doesn't mean anything without follow-up information. But that's one of the organizations that had one of the higher figures, right? Then you had, just pull this up again. They were drinking wine, celebrating with the Israeli flag at an assassination that Israel admitted that they predicted 300 casualties, civilian casualties, as a result of their airstrike, and they took down an entire city block. And here they are, human rights advocates and a human rights organization drinking wine at an assassination. I mean, here's another one, human rights activists in Iran. At the time they said 6,000, again, very different figure. And just so everyone knows, because they were cited throughout the media, they partnered with the National Endowment for Democracy, NED, which is a U.S. soft power tool, which was established under former U.S. President Ronald Reagan to continue the CIA's work under NGO cover. All right. Then there's the United Against a Nuclear Iran. And by the way, there's dozens of these NGOs, which are like funding from the State Department, have ties to NED. There's so many of them, and they all come out with different figures, right? But then there's the United Against Nuclear Iran. And this is its senior leadership here, Jeb Bush and Mark Wallace, okay? Advisory board. And this is the one claiming that 12,000 were killed at the time when they were producing those figures. And look who's on their Veterans Advisory Council. Oh, it doesn't just happen to be Pete Hegseth. Oh, whoops. But they're an independent organization that totally cares about Iran. These are the people, right? Oh, like original co-founders and former advisory board members. Oh no, definitely. The former general director of Israeli Mossad. That sounds like a very pro-Iranian organization to me. Definitely. Jeb Bush heading are against United Against Nuclear Iran. These are some of the places where you're getting these figures. Otherwise, you're getting them from Donald Trump that skips around between figures, messes them up, says a whole bunch of different numbers. You know, he's the same guy that said that he'd eliminated all of Iran's air defenses, and then 2 days later, an F-15 fighter jet just so happens to get shot down by imaginary, non-existent air defenses, right? So that's who, when we're talking about these figures that are presented, it's either the Trump administration, which has an incentive to lie about it, evidently, that has lied repeatedly about every single other war that they've been involved in and come up with nonsense propaganda and ridiculous numbers. So they're not objective. That's just garbage. To accept their numbers, provide some evidence for the Iranian protests and the protesters. We're talking about, these are numbers, and the reason why they make them so high, by the way, because some of them were putting like, oh, it's probably 100 and 120,000. It's actually 80,000. They're doing that to undermine the Gaza genocide. That's why they're putting these numbers out there. And then these ridiculous people that are just so emotional about it and connected to these ridiculous numbers, which no one can even tell you which number they believe because it's a whole bunch of different ones. Like they can't provide you any evidence. It's just utterly ridiculous. And unfortunately, some people, when they're arguing about the war in Iran, will just sort of accept this propaganda. And they think that accepting this propaganda and this nonsense about the numbers is like a good strategy, I guess. Well, you know, I'm not that far gone. You know, I'm accepting all your propaganda, but you still shouldn't bomb and destroy Iran. That's basically their argument. And that's the argument, by the way, of somebody like, imagine you're representing, since we're talking about the death penalty a little while ago. Imagine you're a lawyer representing your client. Your client is they're trying to put him to death, right? Trying to give him the death penalty. And they've accused him of murdering a bunch of people, let's say. And you know that he's innocent, right? And you don't want the death penalty to be applied, right? Do you go in there and go, yeah, he did murder like 5 people, but I think the death penalty is a little hard. Let's not do the death penalty. Do you think that's going to work? Well, how about you investigate first? If you're the lawyer for this person, right, you're advocating a position of not executing this person, then you're going to try and get to the best argument possible, right? So maybe investigate the claims that are made against them first. Maybe look into that. Because if you go to all of the mainstream human rights organizations, not these ones funded by the State Department or the US government and Donald Trump's numbers, if you go to the mainstream human rights organizations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, which are not favorable of Iran, they're not at all favorable of Iran. What they were saying at the time is thousands of people were killed, right? There's evidence of thousands of people being killed, and that Iran has used force, overwhelming force, indiscriminately, all of that. They're accusing Iran of committing serious crimes. They're not being gentle with them at all. But they don't come up with these ridiculous, they didn't come up and go straight away, there's 56 billion people that were killed within 10 seconds. And then if you don't accept these ridiculous numbers, which are massacres, which, you know, are so horrible that they outdo the numbers of the Gaza genocide in terms of how quickly they were committed, it's just utterly insane. But we're just supposed to sit here and accept these stupid numbers. And again, if you're defending your client and you know that like these numbers they don't seem correct, there's oh, he killed 6 people. No, he killed 4 people. Oh, I actually think he killed 1 people, but we're going to put him to death for murder anyway. Well, let's get to the bottom of this and see if what they're saying is correct in the first place. That's again, like just going into this and just accepting the nonsense propaganda. It's the same as you have to get to the bottom of the nonsense, because at the end of the day, the whole justification for the invasion of Iraq and toppling its government was weapons of mass destruction. You can't go, yeah, he has weapons of mass destruction, most likely, but let's not invade. That's not a good argument. It's not. It's nonsense. They're peddling lies. By the way, on the topic of the human rights organizations, Amnesty International is the one that actually legitimized, if everyone remembers or knows about this, the invasion, the first Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, was the U.S., its involvement and its massive air campaign and its mass murder and destruction that it committed against Iraq at the time was justified due to a sob story that was sold to the American public about the Iraqis going into civilian areas and massacring civilians, but particularly throwing hundreds of babies out of incubators. That was the big babies out of incubators in Kuwait story. And it was Amnesty International that backed that story up without any evidence. And that is the story, the false flag, the fake hoax that enabled or provided a justification to the American public for the US military to get involved against Iraq. So these human rights organizations are not actually beyond criticism, even the ones, not these ridiculous ones that call themselves human rights organizations and then celebrate people's deaths online, right? But even the established ones, you have to look at everything critically. Even historically, now Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, for example, during the Gaza genocide, have largely been good in their reports. But if you look at their reports in 2014 and how they reported back in 2012 and 2008-9, when the massacres were committed against Gaza, they commit a disproportionate amount of time to condemning Hamas and its rocket fire and how horrible that is. And, the 5 Israelis that are killed by the rockets opposed to 2,400 Palestinian civilians. And they do that because, again, they've got pressures. And they've historically done that. And in some cases, they just didn't even write up reports. So these organizations are not like the Holy Grail, whatever they say is beyond, it's untouchable, because they can be biased as well. So you have to look at this stuff and you have to think to yourself, what agenda does this align with? Now, people will say, but what are the figures, right? Because that's always the challenge. What are the figures of the Iranian protesters killed? The Iranian government put out the names and all of that. It's over 3,000 that they claim. I haven't seen anyone put out a counterclaim that has any legitimacy, that's backed up by anything. Certainly not anything that's in the tens of thousands. Nothing. That's why they have to keep changing the figure all the time, because they don't have a figure. And the internet came back on in Iran, and according to these people, these diaspora people, the Shah supporters, now all the footage is going to emerge. Be ready for the horrible massacre footage. You know what happened? Nothing emerged. No evidence of your 50 billion. And why I'm saying this in this way is because it is so ridiculous that you need to substantiate it. You can't just simply make a claim, because it's war propaganda. You're doing this in order to demonize a country, to justify murdering their people. And people say, how many people died? I don't know. I know there's a list out there put by the Iranian government. I'm not naive. I'm not going to say that exactly what they're saying is correct. But I do know there was a foreign plot. I do know that the former Secretary of State admitted that the Mossad was involved. I do know that the US president himself admitted to arming Kurdish militant groups with the hope that they were going to go fight and overthrow the Iranian government. I do know that there is footage of these rioters with automatic weapons, with improvised explosive devices, attacking police officers, burning police officers alive, going after civilian targets. I do know that's real. So it's not as simple as Iran's military came into the streets and just gunned down protesters. It's not as simple as that. Can I claim to know every single detail? And if there wasn't serious human rights abuses and indiscriminate fire on civilians, it's very likely these things could have happened in the midst of all of this. But where's the evidence for any of it? I've got the Iranian government's narrative where they've provided names and everything, and there's evidence for a lot of their claims. And then there's the other side, which can't even figure out their numbers, is all over the place, and they can't put anything together of any substance to back up any of their claims. So how am I supposed to believe these tens of thousands that always change? The numbers are always changing. How am I supposed to believe that? Or why should anyone believe it at all, especially when it happens right before a US-Israeli attack? And the opening salvos, the opening wave of that attack happens to kill like 170 people at a school, to massacre, 140 schoolgirls, plus teachers and other people around parents. That's the result of endorsing this nonsense and this propaganda. And it's just as stupid as this woman, this propagandist, this Persian diaspora propagandist who gets on a city bike and then talks about the mayor of New York needs to personally help me out with my bike, which is from private company and he has no control over it. It's just as stupid. And their narrative about Iran is just as stupid, because this whole idea about Iran and the oppressive system and all of this stuff that they argue, they want you to believe that Iran is an exceptional case, like Iraq was an exceptional case, and Libya was, and Syria was. They're exceptional cases. So we need to use exceptional brutality and deem their people as if they're not normal. And see, if this is the case, because inside of Iran, there's probably the largest portion of the population they don't want their country destroyed. They're patriotic, but they're critical of their government. And then there's a huge base of support for the government that exists. They're normally religious people, not always, but normally, generally, religious people who, that's why they want the Islamic Republic. They want an Islamic government. But the largest base of people are somewhat critical, right? But they don't want their country destroyed, like these people in the Persian diaspora that want their grandmother's home blown up because, a woman apparently can't reveal her hair on the street in a certain area, right? And so so everyone needs to die because of that. That's the most rational conclusion to draw. If there's something oppressive against women in my country, let's blow everyone up. Let's attack power stations and bridges. Power stations and bridges being blown up will certainly help women's rights. Definitely. That's a great idea. But again, under the Shah, all of these markers for the standards of living of people, when it comes to education, when it comes to access to goods, if it comes to income inequality, representation, all of it improved under the Islamic Republic, despite the fact that it started off straight away beefing with the United States, always constant sanctions, which only grow worse and worse over time, an Iran-Iraq war, which killed around 500,000 of their people, chemical weapons used, hits on their infrastructure, terrorist attack campaigns, which were backed by Saddam Hussein, which killed tens of thousands of people in their country as well. And of course, the United States was pushing all of this the whole entire way. And still, for the average person, it's better than it was under the Shah. There's a reason there was a revolution. Now, not everyone agreed on the outcome of that revolution. Because, there were socialists, there were communists, there was Islamic socialists, all of these different groups of people that participated in the revolution. But the revolution succeeded because it was genuine and from the people. The ones to lead it, because there's always going to, in the end, if you launch a revolution, there will always be a leadership that will take control of it. the leadership was an Islamic leadership, and they founded the Islamic Republic. But there's a reason that happened. If it was all sunshine and rainbows and women with their blonde hair and nose jobs, right, which somehow, again, makes you free for some reason, it's just a personal choice on how you look, right? That's nothing to do with how free a country is. If you've got in the city, you've got women who can afford to do, you know, Botox or a nose job. Anyway, the stupid way of thinking, because that somehow makes you free. But that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. It's a small group of a portion of Iranian society that were succeeding at the expense of everyone else. And that's why they had a revolution. And again, with the whole thing about the entire region, all the Islamic terror and all of this and all these regimes that pop up throughout the Middle East, it's important to consider that when it comes to the resistance against the Israelis and the resistance against the Americans, that for a very long time, if you look after 1948, like in Palestine, you had the old Palestine government. There wasn't an Islamic element to the leadership in Palestine before during the 1940s and before, but it was largely Arab nationalism, and specifically Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, who sort of led this wave of Arab nationalism across the region, and especially when it came to the Palestinian cause, right? Syria ended up being in chaos a whole bunch of times. They had like 7 revolutions and overthrew their leadership. Eventually, Syria never stabilized because the CIA decided to overthrow a leader there, and then the country just kept going into chaos. It never stabilized until Hafiz al-Assad came over and took over the country. That's when it sort of stabilized, right? And now, of course, it's back again into chaos now, right? And it's not properly stabilized. The economy's, collapsed. But for a portion of time, Egypt and Syria actually merged with each other. And the region, this is just a quick overview for everyone. The region was, and the regional resistance was led by Arab nationalism. So even the Palestinian cause, you have the Palestine Liberation Organization. The biggest party is Fatah, which is a nationalist organization. And without getting into all of the details, after 1967, Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, he would die a few years later, and his brand of Arab nationalism would sort of fade away. And people, because of the 1967 defeat by when the Israelis attacked against Egypt, occupied the Sinai Peninsula, occupied the Syrian Golan Heights, the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. When this happened, it was called the Naksa, which means the setback, and people were wanting to find a solution. The ideology again for the resistance in the region started evolving. You had more Marxist organizations which popped up. Of course, this was all during the Cold War. So the Soviet Union and Mao's China were involved in backing resistance, specifically the Palestinian resistance to the Israelis. And at that time, of course, the Shah was in power in Iran. So Iran is controlled by the West. That's what was happening there at the time. So after these organizations were still heading the resistance, and the flavor of the resistance across the Arab world and the wider West Asia region and then Northern Africa was a nationalist resistance and a Marxist resistance. That was the popular flavor. Of course, the Islamic element had always been there, but that's because most of the people are Muslims. So that's always going to be the case. Like, that just happens, right? Gets mixed in. So you had these anti-imperialist movements. In 1982, the Israelis went into Lebanon. They killed around 20,000 people, the majority of them civilians, Palestinians and Lebanese, and invaded Beirut and forced the Palestinian resistance, the PLO, out. This is a really, really brief summary. I think I'll go into this maybe in another live stream and lay it out in a little bit more detail. But after that, again, when the PLO were pushed out of Beirut, the resistance had a major setback. And prior to that as well, you had to keep in mind that Syria and Egypt had fought against the Israelis in 73. They attempted to retake their territory. And ultimately, because Egypt betrayed Syria, they ended up, again, losing that territory. And, Egypt ended up normalizing ties with Israel and sort of betraying the rest of the region and the Palestinians. So, after 1982, when the PLO were defeated and they accepted to go and move to Tunisia in North Africa, again, people were looking for a new ideology as their backbone, new movements to create, because, everything else was defeated. Arab nationalism has been defeated. The Marxist groups have been defeated. And so people are looking for something else. And so in Egypt, you had the Muslim Brotherhood that was very active. And out of that, you had a number of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip who studied at places like Al-Azhar University, and who met with these Muslim Brotherhood types, spoke to them, and started, in the case of Hamas, it would be an outgrowth of the Muslim Brotherhood. And there were other groups like Islamic Jihad, which would go their own separate way, and not, which I will perhaps again go into maybe if people want to hear more about it in another episode. They started branching out, and then suddenly these organizations are fighting in Palestine. They're the ones that, are the head of the resistance. In Lebanon, because South Lebanon is occupied, the majority of the population there are Shia Muslims. They want to resist and expel the occupation. Again, these nationalists and socialist and Marxist movements have all failed them. And here's their, this is who they are. They're Muslims, they're Shia Muslims. So we're going to create an organization, a Shia Muslim resistance. And that's what they did. Hezbollah was formed because of, again, the Israelis. And then you had the Americans, which got involved in fanning the flames of a more sectarian ideology within Sunni Islam, which would form and later grow into Al-Qaeda and go into even the Taliban. Even the Taliban, by the way, they have like this Pashtun nationalism that they were on for a very long time. It's less intense now than it was. But they're not just completely just Islamic. They had the whole nationalism thing as well. But it's just a natural outgrowth of the region. Like, these people are Muslims. And so when they revolt, the Shah, he had the white revolution inside of Iran. And under the Shah, it was pushing, Western liberalism on the people. So to the people of Iran who were being oppressed by the Shah, they saw that the Shah represents the West, right? What does the West look like? What does the West believe? So they went the opposite direction. It's as simple as it is, So that's the flavor of the resistance. And again, the resistance has changed and gone back to Islamic roots, which has worked very well. It's been very effective. The Islamic groups, the Islamic resistance groups in Palestine and Lebanon, Iran, obviously, the Ansarullah in Yemen, which came much later, they've been very effective. But it's just a natural evolution of resistance movements, anti-imperialist movements inside of the region. And if you understand history, it makes complete sense why there are all these Muslim movements that have been created. It's very obvious. And it's for very obvious reasons. It's not complex, actually, to understand. It's human nature, basically. So when they're talking about all these Islamic blah, 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 it's like, well, that's because of resistance to you guys, by the way, that these Islamic groups even exist to begin with. But perhaps we can get into that another day in more detail. But that's just something to keep in mind. Of course, things are continuing to escalate, and it does look like we are on the verge of a major confrontation occurring. And there have been new American strikes on Iran, while we've been on here. Also looks like there have been attacks on the Gaza Strip. The Israelis attacking civilians in Gaza, which is not unusual, unfortunately, because, you know, if they don't get their fix of killing civilians in Lebanon or Iran, they're going to turn to Gaza because, you know, they have to spill the blood of more innocent people in order to feel good about themselves, I guess, because Israel just cannot stop killing innocent people. That being said, if you got this far, by the way, please do hit that like button, add a comment in the comment section below. Let us know what you think, what you want to hear more of. And yeah, please do share this video, subscribe, follow us, hit that notification bell if you are watching on YouTube to make sure that you get updated when we go live. And we are looking for 300 new members so that we can keep this news show going. And we thank everyone who has come on board and joined us. Really does help. And you are the reason why we're here, why we continue to put out this analysis and share this content, because we know that the corporate media is not going to do this, right? So this is the job that has to be done so that everyone can stay up to date, hopefully, on what is happening. And we will continue to follow everything. So we will be back on Monday, same time, same place, and we will be bringing you more updates. If you want to continue to get our updates, you can also get our updates on our social media, on our Telegram and our Twitter or X. We are doing live updates on there, so you can follow what's going on. And again, please do join us again on Monday, 4 p.m. CST, so you can get the latest. And we will go through all of the information, the videos, the evidence, the satellite footage, and perhaps maybe we'll get more battle footage in the coming days because of the escalation of the regional war. So we're going to stay on top of that. Thank you to everyone for being here today, and we will be back.